The night was quiet, cold, and heavy with silence. Inside his small quarter, the servant had just closed his eyes, pulling the thin blanket tighter around his body to shield himself from the bitter chill of winter. Sleep was only beginning to descend when an unusual sound pierced the stillness, the restless neighing of Remo, the newly arrived Arabian horse. His ears twitched and his heart skipped a beat. Just a short while ago, he had passed by the stable and seen Remo standing calmly in his place, perfectly fine. Why then was the animal now making such a loud, distressed sound? At first, he tried to ignore it. Horses sometimes made noises without reason, but this sound was different. It carried a tone of unease, almost like a cry. His instincts, sharpened over years of serving in the household, told him something was wrong. Though the care of Remo was not his responsibility, his nature was soft when it came to animals. He could not simply lie there, pretending all was normal. With a sigh, he pushed aside the blanket, slipped on his worn slippers, and stepped into the biting cold night. The path to the stable stretched into shadows, the moon casting a pale glow over the estate. Each step crunched against the frost on the ground. As he neared the stable, the strange neigh grew louder, mixed with the rustle of straw and the faint creak of wood. His breath clouded in the air, but what froze him entirely was not the cold. It was the sight that greeted him inside. There, under the dim light of the moon filtering through a small opening, stood his young Arab mistress. She was tall, striking, her long black hair falling over her back like a dark river. Draped in an unusual, almost careless garment, she looked as though she had walked out of a dream rather than a bedroom. Her eyes carried a dazed softness, her movements slow, as if she were half asleep or lost in a trance. She was standing close to Remo, her hand gliding along the horse's sleek back, her head bent low as though whispering comfort. The animal, still uneasy, calmed only slightly under her touch. To the servant, the scene was bewildering. What was his mistress doing here at this hour, in this manner? Her gestures did not resemble the careful strokes of someone soothing an animal. They seemed layered with an intimacy he could not understand. His heart pounded heavily as shame and confusion gripped him. He quickly stepped back into the shadows, unwilling to witness more. That night, lying in his bed again, he could not shake away the haunting image of his mistress in the stable. The uneasiness of the horse seemed nothing compared to the uneasiness growing in his own chest. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, the servant tried to convince himself that what he had seen was perhaps nothing unusual. Maybe his mistress had simply gone to calm the horse. After all, she was new to this country, new to the household, and perhaps she could not sleep. But the memory of that night kept returning, sharper with every recall. The way she had pressed close to the animal, the strange look on her face, the odd tenderness in her gestures. It was not something one could easily dismiss as a simple act of care. The image gnawed at him while he worked in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. He chopped, stirred, and placed dishes on the table, yet his mind was elsewhere. Whenever his mistress entered the room, her presence carried an intensity that unsettled him further. Her eyes were lined with faint redness, as though she rarely slept, and her skin carried a constant glow of fragrance and oils that made her seem otherworldly. She greeted him politely, but he could barely look at her without recalling the shadows of the stable. And he told himself to stay loyal to his master. Loyalty had been his guiding principle for 15 years in this household. He had served faithfully, reporting every detail of the home when the master was away. And yet, this was different. This was the master's wife. If he told the truth, he might destroy his master's marriage. If he stayed silent, he might betray the very loyalty he was sworn to uphold. The thought placed a heavy weight upon his chest. That night, the horse's cries echoed again. The servant sat up instantly, his heartbeat racing. A part of him wanted to close his ears and remain where he was, pretending to hear nothing. But another part of him, stronger and more restless, pushed him to rise. He moved quietly through the darkness, careful not to be noticed, and crept once again toward the stable. Through the narrow slats of wood, he saw her again. His mistress was there, whispering softly, pressing her face near the horses as though speaking to a trusted confidant. Then, to his shock, she guided the animal to lick her skin, and afterwards sat at its feet, stroking its legs with a strange calmness. His breath caught in his throat. The disbelief of the first night turned into certainty. This was no ordinary affection. He staggered back, trembling, unable to watch more. Returning to his room, he buried his face in his hands. The shame of what he had witnessed burned him, but more than that was the question. What should he do with this truth? His loyalty pulled him in one direction, his fear in another. As sleep refused to come, one thought grew stronger in his mind. Sooner or later, he would have to make a choice. The mansion had always been a place of order and calm, but ever since the new bride had entered, nothing felt the same. The elder mistress, the master's mother, preferred her late mornings, rising well past breakfast, leaving most of the household quiet until noon. But the younger mistress was different, unlike anyone the servant had ever known. She would be up before dawn, already seated at the dining table or walking through the long marble corridors with the soft rustle of her silk garments. She never looked tired, yet the redness in her eyes told another story, as though she lived with sleepless nights. For the servant, this was unsettling. His duties had doubled, for she expected her meals earlier, demanded dishes infused with oils, dates, and dried fruits he had never used so lavishly before. He had to learn quickly, trying to imitate Arabian flavors for her comfort. The master had instructed him to ensure she never felt distant from her homeland. So he tried, adding olives, saffron, cardamom, and fish, but often watched with unease as she consumed heavy foods with an appetite he had rarely seen in women of his land. She was polite enough, even kind in small gestures, but there was a restlessness in her. She rarely interacted with the other servants, preferring to handle her own belongings. She refused anyone entry into her private chamber, cleaning and arranging it herself, as though guarding secrets no one else should touch. At times, the servant would wonder if she trusted anyone at all in this house. Yet, despite her distance, she had become the center of the mansion. The master adored her and left strict instructions that her every need should be met. When he was away, often for weeks, she ruled the household silently, with her moods shaping the atmosphere. The elder mistress tolerated her, but there was no warmth. Tension simmered quietly between mother and bride, though no open quarrels had yet broken out. For the servant, trapped between duty and doubt, life had grown complicated. He performed his tasks with precision, but every time he passed the stable, he felt his heart tighten. He could not forget the 2 nights he had witnessed. Her sleepless eyes at the breakfast table seemed to confirm his fears that she spent her nights where she should not. And yet, when he tried to reason with himself, he found no answers. Could cultural differences explain her strange habits? Or was there truly something hidden, something his master needed to know? As days turned into weeks, his unease grew heavier. And then, one evening, the mistress made a demand that would change everything and confirm his darkest suspicions. It had been only a month since the master returned from Dubai with his new bride, Jazza. The news had stunned everyone in the household. For the servant, who had worked faithfully for 15 years, it was both a shock and a disruption to the familiar rhythm of life. For the elder mistress, it was a wound to the heart. Her only son, the pride of her years, had married without her consent and brought home a foreign woman from a distant land. At first, the elder mistress refused to acknowledge Jazza. "Arab women," she whispered in anger to the servants, "are nothing like ours, Asinay." They do not belong here. Her disappointment lingered in every look she gave her son. Yet she knew her opposition would only distance him, and so with time she yielded. Outwardly she accepted Jazza, but deep inside her mistrust grew like a silent flame. The servant had seen the change in his master too. Once a man consumed by his business and frequent travels, he now returned with a softer face, his eyes lit with affection whenever they fell upon his new wife. He spoke to her gently, and his voice, usually sharp with orders, became tender in her presence. The household adjusted quickly to this reality. But while the master saw love, the servant and the elder mistress sensed something else, a strangeness about Jazza, as though she were not entirely at ease in her new life. Jazza herself seemed caught between 2 worlds. She was polite, often smiling at the servants, but her ways were unfamiliar. She spent long hours alone, ordering strange ingredients, blocks of alum, jars of olive oil, and packets of spices. That puzzled the staff. She rarely allowed anyone inside her chamber, insisting on cleaning it herself, and the servant wondered what she guarded so closely behind those closed doors. Despite this, the master's love remained blind. His only concern was her comfort. He urged the servant to learn Arabian dishes so his wife would never long for her homeland. He even adjusted the household routines to match her habits. For the servant, who had always reported every detail of the house to his master, this new reality created tension. How could he voice his growing unease when the master was so deeply enchanted? Still, beneath the surface of this uneasy acceptance, change was brewing. The fragile balance between Jazza and the rest of the household was about to shatter. For soon the young mistress would demand something that neither the elder mistress nor the loyal servant could have ever imagined, a demand that would awaken suspicion and fear in ways that no one could ignore. The first true clash in the household came one evening at the dinner table. The master had just returned from a long day, his face tired but softened by the sight of his young wife. Jaza sat across from him, her dark eyes glittering with determination. She was unusually restless, pushing food around her plate until finally she spoke in her accented but clear voice. "I want a horse," she said suddenly. The room fell silent. The servant standing nearby with a tray froze in place. The elder mistress raised her brows, startled by the demand. The master looked at her with a faint smile, shaking his head. "That cannot be. You know I cannot keep animals in this house. I am allergic. Horses, cats, dogs, any of them will make me ill. It is impossible." Jaza's lips trembled and her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. In my land, women cannot live without horses. They are part of us, part of our lives. You are gone so often and this house is so empty for me. If I cannot have a horse, then how will I survive here?" Her voice broke and the room echoed with her sobs. The master leaned closer, trying to soothe her, but she refused to be comforted. She cried with the insistence of someone who would not back down, her words tumbling out between sobs. "You say you love me, but you deny me the only thing that reminds me of home. Why should your allergy matter when I can keep it away from you? I will care for it myself. You will never even see it." The servant watched in silence, his stomach tightening. He knew how deeply the master loved this woman. The elder mistress, however, looked away with disapproval etched on her face. To her, this was only another sign that the foreign bride did not belong. At last, the master sighed. His love defeated his reason. "Very well," he said softly. "If it will make you happy, then you shall have a horse. But it must stay in the back stables, far from the main house. I will not risk my health." The next week, a magnificent black Arabian stallion arrived, strong and tall, its coat gleaming like polished stone. The mistress's face lit with joy, unlike anything the servant had seen before. She ran to the animal, caressed its neck, whispered into its ear as though greeting an old friend. From that day forward, Remo the horse became her closest companion. And while her joy appeared harmless, the servant's unease deepened. He could not help but wonder, was this simple love for an animal, or was there something more, something hidden beneath her strange obsession? Once Remo entered the mansion's stables, the entire rhythm of the household shifted. The young mistress seemed reborn, her loneliness replaced with constant energy. She would rise earlier than ever, walk to the back of the estate before anyone else was awake, and spend long stretches of time with the horse. She brushed his mane herself, polished his saddle, and even whispered to him, as though he were capable of understanding secrets no human could hear. At first, the servant convinced himself that perhaps it was harmless. Maybe she simply found comfort in the animal's company while her husband traveled abroad. But his doubts soon hardened into fear. She did not allow any servant near Remo when she was there. If someone happened to approach, she would dismiss them coldly, insisting she needed no help. Her closeness to the horse began to look less like simple fondness and more like obsession. The master left once again on business, traveling abroad for weeks, leaving behind instructions that his wife be cared for in every way possible. As soon as his absence began, the servant noticed her habits changing even more. She ate differently, stronger meals, heavy with oils and dried fruits, as though fueling herself for something. She wore perfumes so strong they lingered in the corridors long after she passed. And each evening, when darkness spread across the estate, she would quietly vanish into the stables. One night, unable to sleep, the servant rose from his cot. The sound that woke him was unmistakable. Remo's neighing, soft but persistent, cutting through the silence. His stomach tightened with dread. Compelled by the same mix of fear and duty as before, he crept through the shadows toward the stables. Through the small gap in the wooden door, he saw her again. Jaza stood close to the horse, her forehead pressed to its neck, murmuring words in a language he could barely understand. Then, to his horror, she leaned closer, allowing the animal to lick her face as though it were a lover's gesture. Slowly, she sat down at its feet, her hands stroking its legs in a manner that sent a chill down the servant's spine. His breath caught. The disbelief of earlier nights was gone. What he saw now confirmed the darkest suspicion he had tried to suppress. This was not ordinary affection, it was something else, something he could neither explain nor justify. He stumbled back into the darkness, shaken to his core. His heart hammered against his chest as he returned to his room, but his mind offered no rest. The truth was now undeniable. His mistress's midnight encounters were no innocent pastime, and if he remained silent much longer, his loyalty to his master would be nothing but a lie. The following days were the hardest of his life. Every time the servant walked past the stables, a heaviness pressed against his chest. The image of his mistress crouching at the horse's feet replayed endlessly in his mind. He tried to bury himself in work, preparing meals, polishing silverware, arranging flowers in the hall, but nothing could distract him from the question that refused to leave. Should he tell his master? For 15 years he had been loyal. Loyalty was not just a duty, but a part of his identity. The master had always trusted him, valued his reports, and relied on him to keep the household in order during long absences. But this situation was unlike any other. This was not about a careless servant, or broken furniture, or missing supplies. This was the master's wife. The woman he loved above all, the one he had brought from a foreign land against his mother's will. To accuse her of disgraceful acts without absolute proof could mean destroying his own life. And yet, silence felt unbearable. Each time he looked at the master's portrait hanging in the dining hall, he felt as though those eyes demanded honesty from him. Wasn't it his duty to protect his master from betrayal? The conflict tore at him, day after day. Finally, he sought advice from the elder mistress. One morning, as she sat sipping her tea, he approached carefully and lowered his voice. "I must tell you something about the young mistress," he began. He described the nights, the horse, the unsettling closeness. The elder mistress listened with narrowed eyes, her face calm but cold. When he finished, she simply set down her cup and said, "What would you have me do?" "My son chose her. He will never believe me if I speak against her. If you tell him, he may not believe you either. He loves her too much." Her words offered no comfort. Instead, they deepened his worry. She suspected Jaza's strangeness as well, but she had no intention of intervening. The servant was left alone to wrestle with the truth. That night, when Remo's neighing rose once more, he could not resist. He crept back to the stable and saw everything again, more disturbing than before. His certainty hardened, but so did his fear. If the master refused to believe him, years of service would vanish in a single moment and he would be cast out as a liar. Still, his heart whispered one truth louder than fear. Loyalty demanded sacrifice. Sooner or later, he would have to risk everything and speak. The week dragged on with an unbearable weight, and then at last the master returned. His arrival brought life back into the mansion. The servants straightened themselves, the elder mistress softened her mood, and the young bride glowed with happiness as she rushed into his arms. Watching them embrace, the servant's stomach knotted. How could he break the master's joy with such a devastating truth? And yet, every glance at the mistress reminded him of the nights he had witnessed, the whispers in the stable, the shameful closeness. That evening, when the master called him aside as he always did, asking for updates about the house, the servant hesitated. He reported the ordinary details first, the meals, the gardens, the staff schedules. But the weight on his chest grew unbearable. At last, lowering his voice, he said, "There is something more, something I fear you may not want to hear." The master frowned, curious. "Speak," he urged. The words spilled out. The nights, the horse, the mistress's strange behavior, it all came pouring forth in a rush of fear and desperation. The servant's hands trembled as he finished, his head bowed, waiting for anger or disbelief. The master stood still, his face unreadable. "What you suggest," he said finally, "is impossible. Jaza loves horses, yes. But what you imply, no, I cannot believe it. She loves me, and I know her heart." His tone was firm, but beneath it lay a shadow of unease. The servant swallowed hard. "I have no reason to lie to you. I only wish to serve you faithfully. If I remain silent, I betray you. If I speak, I risk losing your trust. But my loyalty demands that you know." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then unexpectedly, the master's eyes hardened. Very well, he said quietly. Tonight I must see for myself. He devised a plan. At dinner, he told Jaza he would be leaving on urgent business, traveling to another city for the night. She listened quietly, nodded, and wished him a safe journey. But once darkness fell, instead of departing, he slipped through the shadows and entered the servants' small quarter. Together they waited in silence, the hours dragging until the familiar sound broke through, the restless neighing of Remo. The master rose, his jaw tight. Now, he whispered. They moved across the cold ground, their steps cautious but swift until they reached the stable. Through the slats of the wooden door, the master finally saw what had haunted the servant for so many nights. His wife, seated at the feet of the great black horse, stroking its legs with an intimacy that made his blood run cold. For the first time, the master's faith began to crack. The master's breath caught in his chest as he stepped into the stable. The moonlight cut across the straw, illuminating a scene he could barely comprehend. Jaza sat on the ground at Remo's feet, her hands stroking the horse's legs as though she were in a trance. When she looked up and saw her husband standing there, her face drained of color. The servant stood behind him, trembling in silence, bracing himself for the storm. Jaza, the master said, his voice low but sharp with disbelief. What are you doing here? At this hour? Why must you sit with the horse like this? His eyes burned with anger, but beneath the fury was a deep wound, betrayal, confusion, the collapse of trust. Jaza's lips parted, but no words came at first. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head helplessly. Please, she whispered, it is not what you think. Not what I think, the master snapped. You begged me for this horse. I refused because of my health, yet I gave in for your happiness. And this is how you repay me? What other secrets do you hide? Tell me the truth, Jaza. Do you love me, or was it only my wealth that brought you here? His voice cracked with pain. Jaza broke down completely, her sobs filling the stable. She clasped her hands together, pleading. I love you. I swear I love you, but I was misled. I was told lies, terrible lies. The master stepped closer, his face tense. Lies? By whom? Through her tears, Jaza confessed. When you left on your travels, your mother called me to her room. She told me that you had other women in your life before me, that when you go abroad, you still meet them. She said if I wanted to hold you, if I wanted you never to stray, I must give you a child quickly. She told me there was a way, an old method. She said if I spent time with a horse, if I touched it, if I kept its tail hairs under my pillow, I would soon conceive and you would never leave me. The words struck like lightning. The servant's eyes widened. The master's face froze. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by Jaza's sobs. Then the master whispered, almost to himself, My own mother. She told you this? Jaza nodded miserably, wiping her tears. I believed her. I was desperate, alone in a new country, afraid of losing you. I never thought of shame or suspicion. I only thought of you. The truth stunned them all. What the servant had taken for betrayal was nothing more than the cruel manipulation of a mother, unwilling to accept her son's foreign bride. The stable was heavy with silence after Jaza's confession. The master stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes flickering with disbelief. For years, he had honored his mother's wisdom, trusting her judgment. Yet here was the truth. She had planted poison between him and his wife. The servant, who had once felt certain he had uncovered betrayal, now felt his face burn with shame. He had misjudged Jaza, trapped by the same lies. The master's voice finally broke the silence. My own mother, he whispered, almost too softly to hear, then louder with pain cutting through each word. She could not bear to see me with you. She would rather destroy us than accept you. Jaza knelt before him, her tears flowing freely. I never wished to deceive you. I only wanted your love. I was afraid of losing you, and I trusted what she told me. I thought if I followed her advice, I would give you the child you longed for, and you would never turn away. The master bent down, lifting her gently to her feet. His anger had not vanished, but it shifted, no longer directed at her, but at the manipulation that had twisted her actions. You should never have believed such things, he said firmly. But I see now that your heart was never against me. Turning to his loyal servant, he added, And you, your eyes saw, but your heart could not know the truth. I cannot blame you. You served me as you always have, though the burden of suspicion was heavy. The servant lowered his head, his throat tight with guilt, but relief washed over him as he realized he had not lost his master's trust. Days later, when the confrontation came, the elder mistress admitted her scheme. She had never wanted a foreign daughter-in-law, certain no woman outside their own culture could be loyal or true. But Jazah, humbled and honest, continued to live with dignity. Over time, her devotion softened even the elder mistress's heart. She cared for her husband, treated the servants with kindness, and carried herself with quiet strength. The lies of the past faded, replaced by respect. Remo, the black horse, remained in the stables. For Jazah, he was no longer part of superstition, but simply a reminder of her homeland, a companion she cherished in a foreign land. The servant, once filled with suspicion, learned a lesson he would never forget, that appearances could deceive, and true loyalty meant looking beyond shadows. In the end, the household found peace again. The story left behind a truth stronger than rumor, stronger than doubt. Love does not belong to one land, one culture, or one tongue. Love is tested, sometimes twisted, but in its purest form, it endures and it conquers all.